When it comes to Isekai, there are surprisingly not very many visual novels that tackle the genre. At least compared to anime, where we get like 50 new ones every season. And personally, I can think of a few reasons for this. However, the main one would be this. Proper, refined world building is not easy to do, but is required for a good isekai story because the entire point is the new world the protagonist is sent to. Sure, you could aim to be a shallow harem visual novel, but if you really want to set yourself apart when creating a story, you need to take caution in planning how you build your world. When it comes to Hatsumira, I'm convinced. At this moment, this is the best isekai story I've had the pleasure to experience. I mean, technically, it's the only visual novel isekai story I've had the pleasure to experience. However, possibly due to this very reason, it doesn't make for an amazing visual novel. What I mean by this is that with the pacing this visual novel takes, it feels structured like an anime. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but consider this. Would you play a visual novel that takes 15 hours to get to its last heroine? And I don't mean their arc. You literally don't see our last heroine, Ailah, until about 15 hours in at minimum. And especially if she was the heroine you were looking forward to, well, in that case, she'd be a lolicon, but that's besides the point. But you get what I mean, right? Of course, there's no issue with that, but combined with the longest common route I have ever played, and yes, even longer than Grisaya's, this visual novel is quite the slow burner. For me, it was an amazing change of pace, and I loved every second of it. I literally just finished Adea's route moments ago, shouted, that's it, and then got to work writing this script, because Hatsumira left an impact on me. Though I may just be filling the void of my post-visual novel depression with script writing, but I digress. Friends or foes, I am Bruce, and today I'll be going loose, talking about how much I enjoyed my Hatsumira experience.
もちろん冗談だって。一応はね。どうかしましたか？捕まえた。あれあれ？妹、ま、今はそれでもいいかな。そうよ。このままでは我々は滅びる。よくないよ、全然。
Note, I'll be comparing this to The Fruit of Grisaya a decent amount, as it is another front-wing visual novel and extremely popular as well as similar to this visual novel. The story follows ace pilot Ichido as he kamikazes into a boat during World War II. Of course, he gets plucked right before he dies and ends up isekai'd in a fantasy land of dragons, mermaids, dogs, zombies, and more. With arguably poor luck, he meets up with the rebel dragon princess and is pretty much thrusted into the middle of yet another war. And that's the gist of it. The chapters follow a simplistic pattern as each focuses on a heroine and their tribe. The introduction chapter is for Yukikaze, the dragon princess, who recruits Ichido, and then they immediately go for negotiations with other tribes to help their war efforts. Chapter 1 is about Ailah and her tribe, the dogs. Chapter 2 is about Meltina and her tribe, the mermaids. Chapter 3 is about Ailah and her tribes, the zombies and dwarves. Bit of a weird combination. I will say that these chapters are long. As previously mentioned, they take their time to world build, which I am a huge fan of. When chapter 1 concluded, I got that end of visual novel depression-like feeling, and I still had another 40 hours to go. However, it should be noted that I have read reviews that were not a fan of how long the common route is, so I take that into consideration if you had issues with Grisaya, because this common route is even longer. When it comes to my favorite characters, here were my thoughts after each chapter and route in order. Now looking at this mess wannabe of a chart, you may be thinking, Yukikaze was always your least favorite. Why would you go down her route first? Well, why else? It's everybody's favorite forced route order. Well, to be more precise, you only have to do Yukikaze's route first, and then you are free to choose. But to be honest, this pissed me off, because I sat like a good boy and read your 20-hour long common route just to do Ailah's route first, and then you made me do her route. I now know what it's like to get cucked. I want to decimate that doggy. I want to mutilate that mutt. I want to get a therapist to help me work through my fucking problems. But there is a great Blink-182 song to summarize my feelings about this, though. I want to fuck a dog in the ass. Coming all the way in the ass and building up all these characters for different tribes made for an immersive reading experience, especially in chapter 1. I really appreciate visual novels that build character for non-heroines. However, when it comes to the routes themselves, they may be viewed as a tad disappointing. These routes are about 5 hours long each, which isn't that short, mind you, but after the common route, I kind of expected a little more. And unfortunately, romance is this visual novel's weak point. At no point is the romance really built up that well, unless you include Ailah's sex jokes, and whilst there are points where the heroines are visibly interested in Ichido, he himself just is uninterested 98% of the time. This was also Fruit of Grisaya's problem, but with Fruit of Grisaya at least you got longer heroine routes. Therefore, whilst the common route made for a very immersive experience, the routes suffered, which is partially what I meant at the start of the video when I said this format doesn't make for the best visual novel. Another disappointing thing about the routes is that the other heroines and the characters of their tribe disappear and are thrown into the background. Whilst this is typical in visual novels, it feels like a gut punch here since they built up the tribes and their various struggles over the course of a long common route. I found myself missing some of the characters as I went through different routes. Who am I kidding? I found myself missing Ailah when I was not doing Ailah's route. One thing I'd like to mention about the routes is that Ichido's presence doesn't really feel needed. Whatever route you go down, all of the other battles that the other heroines are fighting, because each route has you fight a different part of the battle, they win anyway. The only heroine route I felt that probably needs Ichido was Meltina's route. If anything, that should be the true route, but I digress. One thing I loved was the reoccurring villains, who were not only great comic relief, but also get further touched on in Ailah's route. Another reason to love Ailah's route, by the way. They're not just blatantly evil, so they feel realistic too, and the tune that plays every time they're on screen is just glorious. Frankly, these are some of the best reoccurring villains I've seen in a visual novel. The story takes a lot of parallel from World War II. At one point in the game, you are hit with a large amount of despair with the events that occur. Characters on both sides doubt what the main baddie did was justified, including the reoccurring villains I previously mentioned, with the main baddies in question, of course, justifying it as ending the war as soon as possible to save more lives in the end. You know, like nuke parallels. Anyway, a final point I'd like to touch on is again the protagonist Ichido. Whilst as a protagonist he is certainly unique, he goes on and on and on with both military and British speak, and overall is just too dense. If there's one interesting thing I could say about him, it's that despite being overpowered from a human standpoint, as the world he is isekai'd into has many powerful creatures, his overall power level is more balanced. If anything, it's his military tactics that come into biggest aid rather than his physical strength. But at the end of the day, if I had to pick one of the worst things about this visual novel, it would be him. Overall, however, I liked the brief time I spent immersed in the world of Hatsumira. The CGs in this game are crisp, beautiful, and plentiful. The sprites in this game look great too, and while some characters don't have any sprites, the amount of characters that do have unique sprites is shocking. One of the main issues you may find here is that they look exactly like the Fruit of Grisaya's sprites, and I mean that literally. If you can get past that, the graphics in this visual novel are good, if not great. The game's soundtrack at times reminded me of Muv Luv, and at other times reminded me of Rewrite. One track in particular is very Rewrite sounding. The military and conflict tracks are intense and grandiose sounding. The slice of life songs are relaxing and upbeat, but to be honest, the only soundtrack I will remember is the reoccurring villain's theme. There are character route ending songs though, so that's definitely a bonus. This game would randomly crash in the introduction and first chapter, and then I never had issue after that. I have no idea why this happened, as it was not happening on scenes with heavy animation, so suffice to say, I got pretty annoyed. That being said, since it stopped after the first 2 chapters, it won't be much of an issue if you decide to pick this title up. Otherwise, the game has options every other visual novel has, and thus I'm out of things to talk about. Hatsumira is a great isekai story that may shove people away due to it being weirdly paced and too Grisaya-like. Even most of the voice actors from the Fruit of Grisaya return, so at a subconscious level, this VN will remind you of Grisaya. Nonetheless, you shouldn't write it off either. If you have time, money, and the patience to get through a long common route, I am certain you will enjoy this visual novel. So what do I rate this game? Well, in the main menu, there's a section called Bonus X Scenes, and Ailah has hers in a maid outfit. So yeah, 10 out of 10. Am I a degenerate? Sure. Do I regret it? No. And don't forget to subscribe.